Most one-person trekking pole tents save weight by asking you to put up with something else. And that's usually less space, more condensation, or a setup that's kind of a pain in the butt. But this new tent right here looks like it's trying to fix all three of those at the same time. So in this video, I want to show you what makes this tent different, who I think it might be for, and whether or not this is actually a smart shelter or just another tent hitting the market. Now, just to be clear up front, Outdoor Vitals did send me this tent, but they've always let me give my honest opinion about any of their gear. And honestly, after setting this thing up once already, there are a few things that stood out right away. This doesn't feel like a tent that was designed just to shave weight. It actually feels like it was designed to deal with a lot of the frustrations that a lot of us have had over trekking pole tents over the years. So let's go get this thing set up, and I'll show you my first impressions. All right, so first impressions. The first thing that really stands out to me about this tent is that I feel like it was built around the concept of livability. As somebody who's been out through hiking and had to live out of their tent for over a month, there's three real things here that I think that I'm noticing right off the bat. And that's better airflow, more usable space, and an easier pitch, which honestly, these are three of the biggest things that I've had issues with trekking poles in the past. All right, so let's start with ventilation. So most trekking pole tents have one small vent, normally up towards the top of the tent. So one of the first things that I noticed about this tent was that they built a vent system that goes the whole width of the tent. But they didn't even stop there. They also brought up the pitch of the vestibule area to be able to allow a little bit more air to come in from the bottom as well, and then added in all of these mesh areas on the inside of the tent, both on the sides and even on the back, to be able to help so much more airflow happen in this tent. Anybody that's ever had a trekking pole tent knows that one of the biggest challenges you got is most of them are single wall tents, right? And so you're gonna have condensation issues. And that condensation happens a lot of times because of not having good airflow. Now, don't get me wrong. You're never going to completely eliminate condensation with any kind of tent, especially a single wall tent. But at first glance, after setting this thing up, I really think they've done everything they can to try to make sure to minimize that the best that they can. The other thing that they've done to help with condensation is made the walls be further away from you, which is really hard to do a lot of times with a one-person tent. But they've done some similar things that you see happening on some other trekking pole tents, which is they put some guidelines on the sides, which you can take, and then if you take that trick that I use a lot of times and you put a stick in there, you can help pull that away so that it pulls that off. But they've also made the ceiling higher so that now that pulls the walls a little bit further away from you so that you're not having as big of a chance of it rubbing against any of your gear or even yourself if you do get a little bit of condensation in your tent. So of course, we'll have to see once we get this thing out in some conditions. I get out a lot of times in some winter conditions or even close to water conditions where you have a higher likelihood chance of condensation, especially on single wall tents. So we'll have to see what happens when I get it out in the mountains to see, what we're going to deal with there and see how that works and see really how this airflow works on that. The next thing that stood out to me is the space. And that's a weird one coming from me because I've really veered away from buying single person tents for a long time because, as you guys know, I take moose out with me a lot of times on a lot of my trips. And so most single person tents that I've ever seen, or, the couple that I've actually owned in the past, were never big enough for me to be able to have me and him in here, especially with the worries of having him getting on like my AirPad or something. And so this one, though, when I really started looking at the specs, I was like, you know what, I'm going to give this a try because it really looked on paper as more of like a 1+ person tent than it did a single person tent. And so I'm glad I took the chance to do that, because this tent has got a lot of space in it. I'm a really tall person. And so, as I mentioned, one of the things that I really like, so I'm sitting towards the back of the tent right now, and you can see I've still got room above my head. So one of the things that they've done on this tent that I really kind of like is they've made the tent kind of at an angle. And so the back end is the lowest point at 44 inches tall back here. But then in the front, so if I was wanting to sit out in my vestibule and cook or do other things like that, I've got so much room above my head here on the front end, because it's at I believe it's 54 inches at the front end here, which just gives you so much more space in here. So I really do feel like I've got space to sit around and change clothes, or, even if I had to be stuck in the tent, I wouldn't feel quite like I'm in a coffin like I have on some of the past ones. And then they also made the tent really long. And so one of the things that I think that they did, because a lot of us, we have this challenge of we want maybe a smaller footprint tent to be able to be lighter weight and to get out there. But then a lot of us, myself included, like to keep our gear in the tent, because you get into areas where you get these, like chipmunks or other things that could tear up your gear and all this stuff. And so I'm just never a huge fan of leaving my gear out in my vestibule in some of those areas. So I always like to bring my gear into my tent. And so here, I feel like even though this is a single person and there's not a lot of extra space on the sides for that, there's they gave a lot of extra space on the ends. And so right now I have the largest pad that I own in here, and I still have a good 1.5 feet at the end of the tent here. And like I said, this is a long, wide pad. I also put in my mummy pad just to see what the difference would be. And oh my God, the amount of space in there, because a lot of times I will take the mummy pad out just to be able to shorten up my footprint. And there was so much more space in here once I had that in. And so if you're going out on your own and you want to be able to have your gear in your tent with you, then this is definitely going to be an option that would help you with some of that. And then for me, being able to go out with Moose, there is actually room for him to be able to be cuddled up in this tent here with me and us to have some space. Now, the one thing I am a little skeptical about is, the spaces it can either be at the top of you or at the bottom, depending on what you want to do. So I could either slide my air pad down and have my feet more towards the bottom, and then have him at the top, which is probably what I'm going to try to do, because as you guys have known, if you've seen some of my videos, Moose likes to be close and he likes to snuggle. And so I think having him up near my head will probably make it a little bit easier for him to feel like he's next to me. I don't think we're going to get away with him sleeping at my feet, because then I think he's just going to try to crawl on to me. So it'll be interesting, because there's definitely not room for him to lay on the side of me like he typically would do in my 2-person tent that I go out with. So I do think that there's definitely room in here. I like how much space it is if it's just me, but I even think that there's good space in here for even him and I. The other thing that I really like about the size of this one is that it's not tapered. A lot of the 1-person tents that I've been seeing nowadays, they taper them down. They're just really trying to minimize the footprint, right? And so they feel like most people are going to be using those mummies like I had, and then they taper it down to where then you really have no extra space around that mummy. And you only have one way you can put your head. What I like about this with them having it both sides is that I can make that decision. I don't mind having a little bit of extra space and a little bit extra of a footprint if I know that no matter where I'm going, I can set this thing up and I can either choose for my head to go this way, or I can choose for it to go this way. And then I can also decide too how I want to shift myself on where I want to put that gear, or even put Moose. So I really like that portion of it, because also with it being a single person tent, there's not a second door on this tent like you would see with my 2-person tents, because then what I can do is just decide which door I want to use. But with this being a single person and just having the one side to it, I like having that flexibility when I'm going out and trying to figure out where I want to put this thing. The other thing that I really like about this when we talk about space is the guy lines. When you first look at it, and you look at these really long guy lines that they put on here, you think, oh, that's just a whole lot of extra. I'm just going to cut some of that cordage or do whatever. And then it's extra weight that you don't need. But I tell you what, I've been in so many situations with a trekking pole tent when I get out and I go to put it up, and right where you need to be able to put the stake is a rock. And so having that ability to be able to extend out that guy line, to be able to get past some of that, or really be able to figure out how you're going to put in those tight spaces that you're in, I think it's really worth it. And so the way I ended up doing this and the way I set this thing up is I just started with it about halfway. And then that way I could go around and tighten it up as I go. The other thing that I noticed when I was setting this thing up is just how easy it was to get it up. One of the challenges that I see a lot of times with trekking pole tents is, I tell a lot of beginners that you probably shouldn't use one unless you've practiced it a lot, because they can be pretty finicky about how they actually go up and how you get them set up, and then you go to tension in on them and other things, and it just takes so much practice to be able to get them set the right way. But the way they designed this, it really went up really easy. Like, I didn't have to go around pulling out and drawing on everything 3 or 4 different times like I normally would on things. I literally loosely kind of staked out all of the corners, got everything up, and then I went around and just kind of tightened it up just a little bit, and it all seemed to really get good in time, really quick like. And so it seemed to be a lot easier to deal with. Now, I will say too, though, one of the things that kind of frustrated me in the beginnings with this tent was that the stakes have to be purchased separately, right? But I tell you what, I went ahead. The more I really thought about that, the more I, decided to not be so, angry about that. Because that's one thing that sometimes will get me miffed about some of the tent companies, is that, they just want to keep nickel and diming you on things. But really and truthfully, the more I thought about it, we all, if you've owned at least one tent, we've all got stakes at home. And a lot of us too, if you've started working and dialing in your systems, you've got your preferred stakes or stakes that you really like. And so I've got so many different stakes that it really wasn't that big of a deal, if I didn't buy the stakes that they had with this. I mean, like, I've even over time, like, for example, I've got a stake here, I've got the MSR, the mini groundhogs, that I've bought before that are really lightweight, that would work, I think, really well with this tent too as well. But I did decide to go ahead and, ask them to send me the stakes for it, because I wanted to check them out, because when I looked at it on paper, they looked really lightweight to be such a big stake. And these things are really solid stakes. Like, I really like these stakes. They're only 4 ounces for 8 stakes. And they're a big stake. Like, they're double the size of the mini groundhogs and so much more durable. And so one of the biggest challenges a lot of times that you have, with a trekking pole tent is, putting out some kind of flimsy stake. And then when you go to cinch in on the sides and stuff, pulling those stakes out. Well, I don't think you're going to have to worry about this. And I really even liked how, that front stake, can be used to hold the vestibule, but then also to hold these ridgeline guy lines too as well. And so the one thing I would recommend is when you're putting it up, put the ridgeline guy line on it first, because if you're going to do like I'm doing here and you're going to want to roll up to get the good view and get all the doors up, then you're going to want to have that at the bottom of your stake so that you're not having to try to pull off one and then pull off the other. So it's a lot easier to pull off that top line there for your vestibule to be able to roll up your doors for that. But the other thing too, I noticed when we're talking about guy lines, I noticed that they put a lot of extra, guy lines on the tent going around, to where, like, if you really wanted to, so there's 2 extra ones on the doors at the front and then 2 extra on the back. And so if you wanted to add a little bit of extra cordage, and even if you decided, let's just say you don't carry extra stakes out with you, if I get into a situation where the weather gets really nasty and the wind really gets up and I really want that extra support, I could easily take some of that emergency lightweight cordage that I carry with me a lot of times, and then take a stick or something and make a stake out of it in order to help give some extra support to being able to get this thing out for windy situations. So I kind of like that was added on there. I also noticed, the way this tent goes up, is it pulls out on the flies there for it. And then on the bottom of the tub here, there is a spot where you can stake out the bottom corners of the tub if you really wanted to get that staked out. But you would have to have some extra stakes to be able to do that. And so at first, when I was setting it up, I thought that was a little weird, because you see a lot of tent companies nowadays find ways to try to attach that to the other. So for me, I think what you could do in this situation is you could tie a little extra cordage to it, pull it out to the stake that you have, just like you see with some other companies for that. Or you could even, if you wanted to have some extra stakes, put some extra stakes down it to stake that out. But to be honest, after setting it up and messing with it here for a little bit, I don't even notice that I don't have the bath portion of it staked down. It really just kind of pulls out well with the tent, and you're able to kind of flesh with that anyway. And so I like that they gave me the option by having that extra on there, but didn't force me into doing it a certain way by either making me take extra stakes to put in or even adding extra cordage to it for that. So these were some little things that I think was really cool, that to see them add these little bitty extra things to it so that you've got the options for some of these things, but it really didn't add that much weight to add those things to it. So just a quick note on the fabric. So Outdoor Vitals calls this a NP shield design. And so it's basically a mixture of nylon and polyester. And the idea of it really is to be able to keep the strength of nylon, but reduce how much the tent sags whenever it gets wet. Because if you've ever had a nylon tent and get up the next day and after it rained a little bit the next day and see how much you thought you had your trekking pole tent all taunt out, and to see the sag that happens just because the material gets wet, to me that really becomes important. Now, as far as weight, they say on the specs that the tent by itself is 29 ounces, but I found when I tossed the tent on my scales earlier that it came out at just over 27 ounces without the stakes. And then, like I said before, the stakes, if you get the stakes also, that'll add an extra 4 ounces if you do that. But then if you have your own stakes, or, there's all kinds of ultralight stakes out there that you could add to this. I even noticed, this is 4 ounces for these stakes, and then I toss my mini groundhogs on there if I wanted to carry those out, and they're 2 ounces. So I could shave off 2 ounces by carrying those instead of the others. But to be honest, after putting this thing up a couple times and having it be a little bit windy here at the house already, I think I'm really gonna take out and test these stakes out, because I really like how solid they seem to be. But you're talking all in still under 2 pounds, which is amazing, for a tent like this. So yeah, I mean, they're not chasing, trying to be the lightest tent on the market and making you pay the most amount of money, to be able to get that lightweight. But for what this is a very roomy tent, and I really like what they've done with the airflow, and I really like how easy it was to be able to get it up. So the ultimate question is, who do I think this is for? For me, I think if you like ultralight, and you've had issues with being cramped in tents, had issues with condensation, or even just fighting around with the setup of a trekking pole tent, then I think this could be a good tent, for you to try out. Because I really think they've done everything they can in the design to try to help with all of those situations. This tent's not really trying to be the lightest tent on the market, but I think they're giving it a good go at trying to be one of the most usable. They've even convinced a guy like me who's always sworn by 2-person tents that, I actually think I might like this thing. So I'm really looking forward to getting it out on the mountain and really giving it its test. But at first look, I can already see why this tent's going to get some attention. So if you want to check it out, I'll put a link down in the description below. And if you're new to backpacking and you're still trying to figure out all the gear that you need to have, or if you're just trying to upgrade without all the craziness of trying to figure out what it is you need, check out my free beginner's starter kit that I put together. It really does everything that I could try to do to help you guys get out on the trail for your first time. And as always, guys, I hope this was useful to you. And hopefully one of these days I see you guys out on the trail.